Hello comrades, it's Comrade Reese here, and today I'm going to be talking about anarcho-capitalism. For anybody who doesn't have a clue what anarcho-capitalism is, I will try and explain it in the simplest way possible. Anarcho-capitalists want capitalism, so they want a market economy and they want the private ownership over the means of production. However, they want all of this without a state. Anarcho-capitalism is an oxymoronic ideology that has never been tried, because it is simply a joke. Why do I think that anarcho-capitalism is a joke? Well, it is because capitalism actually requires a state to function. It requires a state to protect private property, and above all, it requires a state to protect the interests of the capitalist class against the interests of the working class. If there is no capitalist state, there is no private property. It's that simple. Anarcho-capitalists are people who are out of touch with reality, and I think they should have a look at property law, which is one of the most complicated areas of law that there is. Many disputes arise when it comes to the ownership of property, especially property that invokes competing interests. What happens when several people claim that they own a particular property? How would you solve a problem like that? Here in Britain, landowners register their land in order to protect it from other interests. The registered title holder will almost always win over those who are not registered, so they register their land with the government. Anarcho-capitalists, however, seem to think that property law is very simple, as they don't take any of these disputes of property into consideration. They would just claim that we should have a system that has property rights and no government, and maybe even elephants that can fly. There are many issues with property law, and I have only mentioned one. Anarcho-capitalists have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. Under capitalism, you need a state to maintain private property and a hierarchy. If you look back in history, you will find that most capitalists actually preferred government intervention, especially when it came to protecting their private property. I swear that anarcho-capitalists have been taking some magic mushrooms, as they are constantly living in a hallucination in which they are in some sort of fantasy world, especially when they think that their little utopia would not require force to work successfully. Anarcho-capitalism would certainly require force to keep the workers in check and to enforce the right of ownership of private property. Private property exists under capitalism because of state intervention. That is a fact. If there is a lack of government intervention, which is what the anarcho-capitalists want, factory owners and other capitalists would be quick to employ thugs to use force against workers who go on strike. So the little anarcho-capitalist utopia would inevitably be a dictatorship of the tiny minority of those who own the means of production over the majority who don't. Anarcho-capitalists don't even know what capitalism is. Capitalism is an economic system where the means of production are privately owned. What is the number one goal of the capitalist? It's to make a profit. How do they make a profit? They exploit their workers by paying them as little as possible in order to keep most of the wealth produced for themselves. It doesn't matter where you work under capitalism, who you work for under capitalism, or how high you are paid as a worker under capitalism. You are still not paid the full value of your labour. That is the definition of exploitation. Anarcho-capitalists seem to think that the people can choose not to work in the modern world. We all know that is bullshit, as you need to work to survive. If you don't find a job, you will have to live on benefits, which of course is no life at all. Also, in most capitalist countries, if you fail to find work, these benefits end up being taken away from you by the government. So you have to find work to survive. And that is often why capitalists get away with exploitation. You will also find in countries such as Pakistan, Indonesia, Cambodia and Bangladesh that wages are very low across the board. So if the workers in those countries quit their jobs, they will just simply die in poverty. So under capitalism, you either work your ass off for very long hours for fuck all, or just die on the streets with fuck all. There's not much of a choice there, is there? In other words, the way I see finding a job under capitalism is just like being confronted by a highwayman. Because when the highwayman holds his gun to your head, you turn your valuables over to him. You volunteer, alright, but you do so because you can't help yourself, as you are compelled by his gun. Are you not compelled to work for a capitalist? Yes, of course you are. Why is this so? Well, it is because your need compels you, just as the highwayman's gun. You must live, and so must your family who you are providing for. Therefore, under capitalism, wherever you work at, whoever your employer may be, it always comes to the same. You have no choice but to work, because if you don't work, you die. Simple. Anarcho-capitalists are always the deluded people who suggest that we are witnessing a crisis of crony-capitalism, rather than capitalism itself. Capitalism is a crisis-ridden system, as capitalists frequently try to sell ever more goods at ever lower costs, and pay workers as little as possible to maintain profit. This is where the crisis comes in, because if you pay your workers as little as possible, they are eventually going to lose their purchasing power. And since the workers are the biggest buyers of the products which the capitalist is trying to sell, if the workers' purchasing power is removed, they won't be able to buy the products that the capitalist is trying to sell. And this inevitably leads to something called an overproduction crisis. The term crony-capitalism is one which falsely describes the capitalist system for what it really is. Capitalism is a flawed system for the simple reason: the way it works, it soon produces goods that nobody can buy, hence the reason why I was talking about an overproduction crisis just now. Anarcho-capitalists, however, like to deny the fact that capitalism is a crisis-ridden system, and they just say that the crisis we are going through right now is something called crony-capitalism. Anarcho-capitalists also like to use the term corporatism to falsify the flaws of capitalism. I constantly hear anarcho-capitalists trying to compare between true capitalism and corporatism, and how in a true free market we would not see the powerful corporations that seem to exist in our present capitalist economy. They try to say that corporations as legal entities are the product of legislation. Thus, if you remove the government, corporations would go away as well. This, of course, is bollocks, as corporations exist for a reason, and these dipshits need an economics lesson to understand why corporations exist, and why they would most certainly be found in anarcho-capitalism. When they say that corporatism won't exist in true capitalism, I really have to scratch my head. What do they possibly mean? Would there not be things like oil drilling and overseas shipping in a true free market? Would people willfully forego the advantages of risk pooling and economies of scale and engage in high risk and inefficient activities? Would the fundamental laws of economics somehow change? No. The laws of economics won't change. And this is why this anti-corporatism talk is such bullshit. If you have the means of production privatized with a market economy, the incentives for incorporating would still be there. In fact, if you were to have an anarcho-capitalist society, such an economy would have an even greater reliance on corporatism. I don't know about you, but every time I have an argument with an anarcho-capitalist, they always shit out the very misleading claim that Nazi Germany was socialist. First of all, Adolf Hitler was pro-capitalist, anti-Marxist and extremely socially conservative. That is why Nazis are often classed as being on the far right. Anarcho-capitalists like to assume that just because the word socialist appears in the Nazi Party's name and socialist words and ideas popped up in the writings and speeches of top Nazis, they assume that the Nazis might have been actual socialists. This is well and truly naive and false. What historical evidence shows is that the Nazi Party leaders paid more lip service to socialist ideas on the way to achieving their one true goal, which was totalitarian power. The whole point of Nazism was to enforce inequality. If you read Hitler's book Mein Kampf, you will find that Hitler actually hated Marxism with a passion, as he described it as a Jewish doctrine, a world pest, and a figment of a criminal brain. So the anarcho-capitalists cannot even get their basic facts right, and I think it is very safe to say that they are distorting history to suit their own political narrative, which is a very disgusting and disgraceful thing to do. Under Adolf Hitler, the average German worker's share of the national income fell from 56.9% to 53.6%, whilst the income from capital and business rose from 17.4% to 26.6%. Therefore, it is quite easy to see who benefits the most out of Nazism: the capitalists. So to compare Nazism to socialism is just extremely fucking stupid. So comrades, to summarise, if you see an anarcho-capitalist comment on this video, or if you come across an anarcho-capitalist in the YouTube comments, do not reply to them. I've made that mistake in the past, and believe me, it is torture. Because even though you may well and truly debunk their delusional dreams, they will just spit out the same old bullshit, and they will just waste your time.
United forever in friendship and labor, our mighty republics will ever endure. The great Soviet Union will live through the ages, the dream of